For the summer of 2025, I had the privilege of hiking a substantial section of the Transcaucasian Trail out in Armenia. This had definitely been a step up for me as far as international thru hiking goes. It was not only the first country in which there was a language barrier, but as you can see, it's in a very interesting part of the world. About the time I was getting ready to go, I was getting some concerning texts from people about Iran. At the time, talks between them and Israel had broken down and missiles were being exchanged. None of this directly affected Armenia itself, but it did end up affecting my travel plans. One of the many countries I stopped over in on my way to Armenia was Qatar for a 16-hour layover. Well, because of the fighting, what would have only been a 2-hour flight turned into a 6-hour flight to get around the conflict zone. And would you believe it? 24 hours, almost to the dot, after I left Qatar for Armenia, Iran bombed a U.S. military installation there. And reflecting on my journey, at this moment, the country has been bombed now twice by both Iran and Israel. Fortunately for me, I had already made it to my hiking destination, and that would be my last bit of geopolitics that I would need to worry about for the rest of my adventure. Well, I flew into Yerevan, slept one day in its old city, getting my supplies together, and the next day I was off to the trailhead. The trail itself starts in the northwest part of the country and makes its way down to just before the Iranian border. As far as trail termini go, there was not a lot of pomp to this one, just a sign with a map of the trail and a rural gravel road. I had been anticipating from user comments and a glance at the elevation profile that this initial section of the trail would not be especially interesting. How wrong I was. The meadows, flowers were in full bloom. The clouds overhead made for cool weather and choice lighting. For as long as I have enjoyed thru hiking, I've always enjoyed hiking wide, open expanses, more than forests, maybe even ridgelines for that matter. And I'm telling you, this part of the country did not let me down. One thing that struck me right away on this hike is that this trail does not get a ton of hikers. See, on that first day I passed through a number of tiny rural villages, and in every single one, bar none, people would go out of their way to say hi and offer things. In that first day of hiking, I was offered flowers, ice cream, fresh fruit, vodka, water, and it even ended with the sheriff of a local village bringing a huge feast of bread, sausage, cheese, chips, and alcohol, which I pretended to drink. These Armenians had already set a new standard in my mind for what it means to be hospitable, a trend which would continue through the whole hike, as I was invited into houses for coffee and feasts and vodka, which I politely declined, far more times than I could count on both my hands and toes. People who did not speak a word of English, oftentimes whose names I never learned, graciously brought a dirty hiker into their homes, and so frequently that you could almost rely on it everywhere you went. Another thing I learned about the trail right away is that the description of trail is not the most accurate. To be fair, I was warned of by some of the Q&A videos put out there that this trail is very rugged, but I severely underestimated those explanations. A great deal of the trail actually followed no visible trail at all. Oftentimes, I would think I was lost, only to learn that I was exactly on the trail according to my GPS. Other times I would be walking down a very clearly demarcated path, only to learn that the official trail took a sharp split from the path a quarter mile back, down the most obscure path you ever saw. I know a lot of these photos appear as gentle, undulating, flowery meadows, but they do not do justice to the fact that you are standing in dense growth, sometimes as high as 6 feet tall. Sometimes the trail had you walk along a cliff or hillside, but without the benefit of a flat footpath. just a slant over some rocks that you couldn't see beneath tall grass. Well, anyways, as you can see, the first third of the trail was dominated by flowery meadows and agriculture. And this was a good initiation into the sensation of being in rural Armenia. The countryside is absolutely full of natural as well as human heritage. Just about every day I found myself walking past some ruined village, an abandoned church, or a derelict Soviet installation, sometimes all three. One highlight from this stretch of the trail, which no picture was able to capture, you'll just have to use the theater of the imagination, had you go down this craggy boulder path into a steep rift valley, and hewn into the rocks as you went down was an ancient hermitage for monks, and you could still make out some of the ancient masonry. Never seen anything like it. I took my first day off in a northern Armenian town called Alaverdi, which is as good a place as any to consider part two of the hike as having begun. It was from this town, and the many miles of climbing out of a canyon from it, that set a new scene for this backpacking adventure. The trail now rose to a higher altitude with many more shepherd encampments. And these seasonal encampments were rudimentary with some nice people. Their dogs, on the other hand. This section of the trail included some very dicey encounters with shepherd dogs. In a country with wild wolves, hyenas, leopards, and Eurasian brown bears, you can understand why shepherds would have these territorial dogs. As the designated trail went through these encampments, often along ridgelines with no room to give them a berth, you would have to hope there was a shepherd around you could wave at and have them call off their dog. Otherwise, you'd just have to pray you didn't become puppy chow as you walked through. For other reasons, however, I found this segment of the trail to be especially difficult. You see, not too long into it, the skies became overcast, then rainy, and that moody weather did not let the sun break through for some 5 days by trail. Just as my luck would have it, the rain always chose to fall at the most inopportune time. For example, after a day of considerably gradual and clearly marked walking, I had to descend through a steep and densely overgrown mountain pass. Well, of course, it started downpouring while I was wading through 7-foot bushes that rubbed sopping wet sky juice all over my clothes. That night, I may or may not have stealth camped under a covered picnic bench, where, if I couldn't have a fire, I could at least try to stoke my soul a bit under a dry roof. But for all the complaining I could do, I did pass by some amazing Armenian apostolic churches in shrouds of fog, with just enough reminders of civilization to keep me from losing my mind. I also got to pass through the beautiful town of Dilijan, and escape the rain from inside one of its delicious cafes. While I took a break, the rain did not. It came to a point where I was walking along a 4x4 track in which every step I took coated my whole shoe in mud. When I wasn't sinking into mud, I was dodging puddles. This was at the end of an especially long day, too, so I was tired and ready for camp. My intended destination was an abandoned village, which I had hoped had some roofed shelter I could stealth camp in. Well, on arrival, there was tons of pigs and cows. This place was not abandoned. Well, where there's pigs and cows, there's also poop. So at the end of my day, I found myself sloshing through mud and poop on this slanted hill, and to make matters worse, the local shepherd dog decided to bother me too. Well, I drew enough attention from this scene that the shepherd came out to investigate, shotgun in hand. He thought I was a wolf. But when he saw I was just a hiker, he invited me into his house, drew me a warm basin of water for my feet, gave me a new pair of socks, cooked up a dinner of eggs, fish, coffee, bread, and offered a spare bed for me to sleep in. He didn't speak a word of English, and I never got his name. but he let me sleep in his house. This was the finest example of Armenia's hospitality that I got to experience, and it really did change the outcome of what was my 4th of July. About noon the next day, the clouds broke, and I finally closed in on the city of Savan, next to the famous Lake Savan. That's where I took a well-earned day off before beginning my ascent into the Gegem Mountains. The mountain ascent wasn't all that bad for a whole day of uphill climbing. It was quite gradual, up to the 11,000 feet. It's day 14, very windy, and I am currently at a mausoleum where I just had a little sit-down. Kind of an interesting place. And now I'm pressing on to a lake that's about 5 miles ahead. 5 miles? Something like that. In any event, the day's been going much quicker than I thought. I hope it stays that way. Although, it's a long water carry, and I don't know what's ahead really, so we'll see. Anyway, I even managed to make it some 30 miles that day. This was a special experience because while I felt like I was certainly in the mountains, I had never been surrounded by so much desolate emptiness. Much of the trail at this point was guesswork, or detours to avoid some mean shepherd dogs. I slept that night at a base camp for a much larger mountain climb, a detour I gladly took the next day, up to a caldera of what used to be a volcano. Day 15, I just did a little tiny detour after a really difficult climb to the top of this caldera, and it's cool, but man, it was really overplayed by those people I met just a couple miles back. In any event, I can say I've done it. So, I did a very impressive day yesterday, close to 29 miles. I'm going to try to take it easier today, just as well, because most of today is downhill. So I'm just going to hike until I go to bed. And that is the plan for day 15. The lonesome open Gegems were best in the deep fog, even if some of the climbs were especially difficult and uneven. Beginning to descend, I definitely maneuvered around shepherd encampments, often still incurring the acrimony of dogs. One was so bad, I'm telling you, this dog wanted to eat me. The local shepherd actually jumped on a horse and galloped up a hill a couple 100 feet to stop this one dog. He was about 4 feet away from me before the shepherd grabbed him by his scruff. And of course afterwards I was invited to a giant Armenian feast. I'm telling you, Armenians, they have us beat with hospitality. A few miles later, I slept beside a river and a valley I had all to myself, with a lovely sighting of the moon. The character of the trail began to change from here. Once airy grasslands through vast open lands, to scraggy desert shrubs and stark hillsides. The afternoon heat had begun draining me. I ended that next day climbing up one of those steep desert hills, anticipating potential Eurasian brown bear activity from what previous hikers had reported from the area. The reality was much different. That night, a pack of wolves assembled maybe a quarter mile from me, howling. That was a fear I did not know I had. I did not sleep one wink that night. But it was just as well, because the next day I would make my way to the town of Yeghegnadzor, and if an Armenian's listening, I hope I pronounced that somewhat right. I was going there for another day off, but not before passing through some more ancient ruins and geologic wonders. The afternoon heat of a desert in the midsummer was beginning to catch up to me, though. I practically collapsed onto my bed when I got to my stay. Well, when I rejoined the trail, I had the good fortune of several miles of flat hiking. Some locals were advising me I come with them back into town and that it was too hot, or so I assumed from the language barrier. It was, after all, 93 degrees. On that flat straightaway, I found myself going through my water quickly, drenched in sweat. There wasn't exactly any places to step aside either. The uphill that would follow did not help. I had some 3.5 liters of water, and if it weren't for the additional liter of vitamin water I was given by some German tourists, I'd have surely been in a much worse situation than I was already getting myself into. Even by exposed and scorching uphill hiking standards, the trail was unforgiving in that it slanted upward upon no visible footpath, with no cover from the sun. Its descent to my halfway point of the day was a technical scramble. Done more on the butt than the feet at times. When I finally made it to the halfway point of the day, I had long since drank all the water I had. And it had been drunk, but not absorbed. This was the third day of that happening, and the days were only getting hotter into July. I had only done 13 miles and managed to drink all my water. Even on my bigger days on this trail, I had not managed to go through so much liquid. I knew at that point that it would not be wise to continue, not even by night, what with the wolves. It had simply gotten too hot in the season. So, at the stunning Noravank Monastery, at approximately 3,500 miles in my thru-hiking career, I did something I had never done in my backpacking. I quit. And as I reflect on it now, 2 months later, I'm ultimately glad that I did. Hitchhiking back to town was easy. Hitchhiking from town to the capital city 2 hours away, well, that's its own story. Long story short, I got to see the Armenian Prime Minister, and I got a ride back from an off-duty National Guardsman. And I got to drive through a political enclave of the country of Azerbaijan to take this jaw-dropping photo of Mount Ararat. And that was my summer in Armenia, all 300 miles and change of it. I had some extra time and money, so I made an impromptu trip over to Malta on my way home. I needed a Mediterranean vacation after all that weight loss and sweating. And Malta was a super cool place, very underrated. When people ask me about the Transcaucasian Trail, several things tend to come up again and again. First of all, the worst part about the trail is the trail itself. This is nobody's fault. It is designed to be remote, rugged, and untrammeled. But that was definitely the worst part for me. The best part, however, was that the whole country felt unspoiled. The land, vistas, the heritage, and most importantly of all, the people. Armenia feels like it will one day be a roaring travel destination for folks who want to beat the crowd and experience a rich cultural deposit of history and humanity. I'm very grateful I got to experience it how and when I did. I say that of all the trails and hiking I've done, more wild, scary, lovely, beautiful, tiring, and amazing things happen per mile than any of them on this trail. It's as if I wasn't backpacking, but just happened to have a backpack and a tent, while I vagabonded around in a land that has so clearly been steeped in Christian charity for the last 2 millennia. Thank you, Armenia, for your lovely people and opening your homes to me. Maybe one day I will be back. But I have absolutely taken from you a resolve to love my neighbor as much as you loved a stranger from America.